Okay, hello everyone, welcome. I'm very sorry for the late start. We were having a few technical issues, but welcome to VC Podcast Part 2. Yesterday's podcast was absolutely fantastic, very insightful and extremely educational. I myself learned so much, and again, today I am indeed is excited. So yes, I am your host Naomi Simon from 20 something podcasts. So we do these we do podcasts fairly regularly, and they can be seen on iTunes, etc. And so we've teamed up with Vanguard Connect to do our first live podcast, and hopefully you will enjoy and we'll find solutions to some of the issues affecting our community. But now let me introduce to you Vanguard Connect's leader, founder, initiator, Peter Adefioye.
Naomi, you with these introductions. But again, thank you, and yeah, I'm well, and it's good to have a part 2 actually, because the feedback that we received was really good. And again, I would really just encourage people to get involved even more via Twitter, as I know a lot of people have a lot of opinions about the issues that are raised. And again, just to remind people, the whole purpose, sole aim of Vanguard Connect, as well as this podcast, is to literally initiate such discussions that empower us to be conscious, and conscious simply meaning to be aware of oneself as someone from the African or Caribbean community, or African and Caribbean communities. And once this is done, then we can help our perception of ourselves and others' perceptions of ourselves, and can achieve things further.
Fantastic.
So without further ado, yeah, I'd like to pass it back on to Naomi, and thank you to our speakers today from our group Vanguard Connect. It should be an awesome show.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. So Baruti, if you could come on and introduce yourself, please.
Definitely. Peace and blessings, everyone. I go by the name of Rudy Lebre, and I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an event impresario, clothing designer, and aspiring scholar from New Jersey, specifically within the States.
Excellent. Wonderful. Do you want to say a bit more about your clothing brand?
Yes. Well, I have a lifestyle brand called Libre Brand, Freedom of Flyness, and under that division, I have the clothing under the same name, Libre Brand. It's a clothing line that internalizes the ideals of freedom, liberation, and culture, and delineated via the aesthetics on the fashion. So we have a lot of Afrocentric designs, specifically with the Kente designs, and also we have Mesoamerican designs, specifically from Aztec aesthetics.
Wonderful, thank you. Jemima?
Okay, hi, my name's Jemima. I'm a final year student at the University of Nottingham studying philosophy. Last year I was the sports secretary on my ACS committee, and this year I'm currently a coordinator for a mentoring project called Springboard.
Brilliant, thank you. And Ruth?
Hi everyone, I'm Ruth. I'm a student at uni in London. I'm originally from Leicester, where I started Miss Afro Beauty, which is a beauty pageant aimed at showcasing and highlighting more black beauty by putting them in frontline positions such as high-profile beauty pageants and modeling jobs.
Wonderful. Thank you. So all of you guys are doing amazing things, and so that's why we've asked you on this panel today to discuss a host of issues, and we're going to be running through different topics throughout this hour session. So the first one, what we're going to do is explore identity. So last month, on an interview with Oprah, Raven Simone said, and I quote, "I'm tired of being labeled I'm an American. I'm not an African American. Okay, I'm an American." Therefore, seemingly abandoning her African or black ancestry. So this has caused some outrage, with many denouncing her words as blasphemous. So this really led me to question, are we lacking a sense of pride for our culture? Why do some of us, we're living in Britain, do some of us reject our African ancestry because we're lacking a sense of history, a sense of pride? And Baruti, maybe you could perhaps start us off with that question.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that was a deep question right there, and I wanted to answer the question. Well, I can't speak for the Afro-British population, but then again, I guess that I came from the outside looking in. But what I'm going to speak about is the African American population as it relates to the African diaspora, and I think that what's going on nationally and also somewhat globally from the outside looking in or externally speaking, I am noticing a lack of pride. I am noticing an inferiority complex or inferiority complexes among people of African descent due to the institutional racism, due to the colonialism and imperialism, and predating that part of me during the times of chattel slavery. Because with slavery, it wasn't just economics, but the thing is that in order to justify or to legitimize slavery, then you had to get the person psychologically to think that they're nothing but a slave. So in order to do that, you had to make them denounce who they are. You had to make them denounce their self-esteem, denounce their names, denounce their tribe, denounce their culture, denounce their philosophy, denounce everything to the point at which they're not humans. They're dehumanized and they're commoditized for the purpose of making the so-called colonial masters, but during that time, the slave masters powerful and us inversely powerless. So a lot of this is still going on today. Remnants of this still resonate and they still reverberate in this age of mass media and also in this age of digital technology. So her saying that she doesn't want to be labeled is not surprising whatsoever, but that's what's going on with the masses of people. And I know that with the African population in Europe and also in continental Africa, I know that skin bleaching is a very lucrative industry in and of itself, and that perpetuates the philosophy or the concept that is known as white supremacy, so-called white supremacy, to the point at which black and brown people, they internalize a sort of philosophy or a sort of way of thinking because they think that they will get them ahead, and they look at being black or they look at black culture or African culture as being inferior, when honestly it's the other way around, because before there was any history, there was African history. So the key crisis that affects African life or black life is the culture crisis.
Great. And I would like to encourage our listeners to use the hashtag #VCPodcast on Twitter to tell us your thoughts on what Baruti has just said. And following on from that, Baruti, and Ruth, you might want to interject here also, many would say that, okay, we blame slavery too much, and we use that as an excuse. And so with in regards to identity issues. And so, Ruth, what would you say to that? Did slavery happen too long ago for it to affect us now?
I don't think it happened too long ago. The problem with when I feel the same way, as in we blame slavery too much, I just think because people don't have anything else to hold on to, everyone holds on to slavery because it's the only bit that's publicized. The problem is education. If people know their history and people are interested to know their history, it's not just the slaves who came to this other side of the world and weren't allowed to learn their history. It's even the ones in the continent, like
exactly.
Yeah, it's the ones on the continent who have all this richness and wealth around them, but they still aren't bothered enough. It's like when you have something and you take it for granted, and then you notice it when you're not allowed it.
Exactly, but over there on the continent, they suffer from neocolonialism and imperialism, and of course, with the neocolonialism, that's where exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely something that it's an all-round issue. The problem is simply for us to be interested enough to want to find out, what it is exactly that is our history, and then we can bring that out to people. No one else is going to teach us our history. We have to educate ourselves.
And how do we educate ourselves?
By being interested in it. Like, you go out of your way to find out. I was born in Cameroon, and I had a lot of history around me, but I didn't learn about it until I got to an age where I turned back around and said, hey, why do the people do that, and why do they do this? And you realize that not enough people know why certain things are done. So how can they carry on and teach someone else knowledge that they don't have?
But where do we access these resources in order to gain this information? Jemima, I know you work in education. What do you think?
I think that these resources for us to find information are literally at our fingertips right now. We live in an age where we have so much information at our fingertips, and I do agree with Ruth. It is about being interested in it to find out this information as well. We have books, we have the internet. We can literally find out all these things if there is an interest to find out and educate ourselves.
Fantastic. And to just interject, we've got a tweet from _Refa, and she says, I don't think it's a rejection of heritage. more that people do not feel an affinity towards their past, or quote unquote past, as it's not what they know.
So how do we, is she saying that we need to empower the past, the infinity?
I feel what Raif is saying here is that because just because there seems to be a rejection of heritage does not necessarily mean we don't care. We being people of this day and age don't have as strong as a connection with people who suffered in the past. Therefore, we don't know too much about it. Therefore, we cannot connect with it. That's why we don't feel so obliged to learn about it, if that makes sense. I don't know what you feel about that, Baruti in particular.
Right. Baruti, do you wanna answer this tweeter?
Right. Could you restate the tweet or reiterate the tweet? Pardon me, or yeah.
Definitely, I'll read it. I'll read it again. It says, "I don't think it's a rejection of heritage, more that people do not feel an affinity towards their past, as it's not what they know."
I think that is both. I think that he's accurate in this analysis, but then again, there are people that are apathetic towards the Africanity as well, because they don't see the relevancy of it. Number one, and number two, due to what's propagandized within the media, due to what's propagandized within education, people think that being African is being synonymous with being a slave or being a savage and things of that nature. Unfortunately, because people lack the education, and of course, it's inexcusable because there are numerous resources out there, and it takes a lot of people to research, and it takes people to search, and so on and so forth. But then again, we have to understand that we're inundated with a lot of information which is against African empowerment, which includes African history, African culture, African merits, even in this day and age, if you will.
Do you think the word Africa or African or black is associated with a negative context? Is that the issue here in Raven-Symoné's case?
Well, I think that yes, number one, and also number two, like I said, as aforementioned, the institutional racism as well, because of course with the institutional racism, there's no incentive. There's unfortunately no incentive to embrace your Africanity or your blackness, because phenotypically, black people are not, how should I word this? People of African descent do not have the advantage, because racism, discrimination, and also prejudicial assumptions do exist. And of course, like I said, the people that are usually in power are phenotypically white, or people that look like us, but they have a stereotypical Caucasian agenda, if you will. So of course, with her, she doesn't want to be labeled with people that look like her because of the conditions that exist, and also because of the racism. And also, additionally, as it relates to people within our history and culture that don't want to, people that within our society that don't want to embrace our history and culture, if you will. So yes, that's what I think it is.
And just to reiterate, the solutions there were that there were many resources that you can access over the internet, many books. In fact, much of the music can also be used in order to gain extra information.
You might want to go back to some old music and actually look at where, I know everyone's crazy about Afrobeats now, but this Afrobeats is alright to dance to. But when I think of Afrobeats being, maybe because I have the advantage of having experienced the other side of life, I suppose, back home in Africa, I see a lot different, where I don't see the meaning in the music anymore. Whereas African music a few years ago was all about meaning, all about some sort of feeling. And that's just completely lost now. So it's not even like the music is transcending to continue educating people. It just seems to be losing its value.
Okay.
And just to interject and interrupt there very briefly, for the listeners out there and for the young people who don't necessarily see the benefits to their lives individually when it comes to knowing about, one of you mentioned being educated about your heritage, your culture. What is the benefit? Just to clarify for people out there, what is the benefit and heritage in their life and the lives of others around them? How does this affect them?
Good question.
Is that for me or
anyone?
Okay, yes, all right. Excuse me. All right, from my perspective, the reason why that we as a people should embrace our history and culture is not for the purpose of just celebrating as the aestheticism of it all, or to be egotistical or narcissistic by saying, oh yeah, we're the original people, yes, I'm African, whoop whoop de whoop whoop de whoop. No, that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of embracing history and culture is for economic development and political power, so that we could enhance our GNP, our gross national product, and our GDP, our gross domestic product. And I'm speaking about the respective countries where they have people predominant of African descent, because economically speaking, a lot of us, I don't know what it is in the UK, but within the United States, a lot of us do not control the resources within the communities that we live in. A lot of us don't own the real estate within our communities. A lot of us don't own the retail businesses, the service businesses, the manufacturing plants, the distribution corporations or businesses. We do not own or control a lot of that, and that's where the power is. Once you have economic power, then that will lead to political power, because the executives, and should I say the investors, are the ones that fund the campaigns of the various people within the democratic society, the various candidates. And then that's how the candidates get into office. And when they get into office, they're usually not serving their plebeians. And when I say plebeians, I'm talking about the common people. They're actually working for the people that funded their campaigns. So it's a patron-client relationship, or relationship of reciprocity between the people that are economically powerful, and they elect the people that could hold the position of political power. But then again, within a democratic society, what we have is political ventriloquism, in which you have the face or the countenance or the facade, and people blame, oh, Reagan did this, or Obama did this, or Margaret Thatcher did this, or Gordon Brown did this, or David Cameron did that. Well, really, that's not the powerful person. The powerful person, or the powerful entities, are the people that are behind the scenes. So the purpose of embracing history and culture is for economic development and political power, so that we could inculcate the next generation, or so that we could inculcate everyone to embrace the history and culture, because by embracing the history and culture, that is the social and cultural glue in order to unify and consolidate people together for the purpose of bringing about political change, so that we could be respected on the global stage. Because when people say race, it's not just phenotypical designations, but race as it relates to competition, and that's how it is within the global stage. Within the first world, second world, third world, based on Cold War political designations. But the thing is this: we're at the bottom, and in order for us to get to the top, we need to embrace history and culture for the purpose of power.
Wow, Baruti just gave us a whole sermon there.
Amen.
Coded it straight up there. Thank you. Thank you. And I think the solutions were, in fact, in that answer. And now there's no reason for us not to go and find out about our history and our identity, and be comfortable and proud of it.
That's the only way we're going to move forward. That is the only way. I mean, look at it. I'm going to go back to this music reference again, and just because I know something we've all experienced at some point, the reason why it's so popular is because we're so proud to put it out there. Our pride is pushing it. And
just sorry to cut you off there, we have to move on because we need to get through all these topics. So I'm just going to go on to topic 2. And it's quite current. So last week, Piers Morgan wrote an article, and in short, stating his reasons why he felt that black people should stop using the N-word. Now, considering he has also stated in the past that he wished that the British Empire still exists, what do you think are the effects of him trying to tell black people what words they can and cannot use? Jemima, if you may start us off, please.
Okay, so I didn't quite hear the second part of what you said. I heard the first bit about the N-word. I didn't quite hear the second bit.
Okay, so considering that Piers Morgan has also said that he wished that the British Empire still exists, what do you think are the effects of Piers Morgan telling the black community what they cannot do, or the words they can or cannot say? What are the effects of his article, do you think?
Okay, well, I think considering that it is coming from him, it might seem like he has no place to say what he says, but I do agree with him in the sense that we shouldn't really be using that word. And it's just, if you think about it, just because it's coming from the wrong person per se doesn't mean he's not saying the right thing. I don't think we should be using that word at all, and I don't see the benefit of it at all. I don't see how it will empower us or lead to anything positive. So I think irrespective of what he said about the British Empire, I think he's right about not using the word.
The N-word. Great.
Yeah.
And Ruth, would you agree with that?
I mean, it just irked me a little bit because it came from Piers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he does make a point, you know. If you want to stop, like, there's no way for us to validate calling ourselves something, because I had an argument with a girl I went to school with because she quoted on Facebook a Nicki Minaj quote, and she wrote the word all out, and in my head all I could envision was her singing it, and I was just like, do you mind that there are people that might be offended by this? And she just didn't understand why, and she's a Caucasian girl. She doesn't understand why anybody, she said us colored people can say it, but she can't. So there's no way for us to determine who and who can't say it. So
to interject very briefly, I actually received a message as well a few days ago regarding this topic, in regards to people speaking how the N-word is now a word of empowerment. That this is a phrase. this is something that is quite widely. So yeah, it's a widespread concept within hip hop as well. That you will hear some famous rappers in particular, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this, Baruti, that the word N-I-G-G-E-R was what was used just before someone saw the end of their life, some hundreds of years ago, whereas now the word N-I-G-G-A is a word of empowerment, that they're talking to brothers. What do you guys feel when people talk about that? And is it something, are words only as powerful as the power we give them? So in a sense, if we use that word and we don't actually understand the meaning, does it actually have any power? Do we place too much power on it?
First and foremost, there was an old poem that I heard saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me." Well, let me say you something. That's a mendacious lie. Words do hurt, and words could empower as well. And also, number two, when you said that hundreds of years ago people were killed and that was the last word that they heard, well, in 2014, if we talk about the black communities, if we talk about a lot of the urban black communities which are inundated with destitution, poverty, and so on and so forth, and even the black communities in the UK, if we speak about parts of South London and East London, that's the last word that they hear, and it comes from, you know, people that look like them, and also from a lot of the police officers as well. And also number three, in response to what you said, when you say N-I-G-G-A or N-I-G-G-E-R, it's the same thing. It's like tomato, the same thing. It's the same word. Now, exactly. Now, as it relates to the word is under the umbrella of what we call white supremacy, if you will. Now, when I say white supremacy, that doesn't mean that I'm anti-white, because there are white people that may get along with more so than people that look like me. But then again, that doesn't mean that white supremacy doesn't exist. White supremacy is inimical, and also it is villainous as it relates to our growth and empowerment as a people, and that word nigger is under that umbrella of white supremacy. And under white supremacy, in order for white supremacy to be legitimate, what has to happen is the niggerization of the psychological mindset of the people and also the culture of the people, to the point at which they see themselves as subservient, they see themselves as inferior, and once they look in the mirror and all they see is a nigger, then they'll see somebody else that look like them as a nigger. Then of course what they're going to do is treat that person that's so-called a nigger just like how the so-called slave masters and the colonial masters treated black people, who they coined as so-called niggas. So the thing is that I think that that word is unacceptable, because you don't hear Latino people calling each other spics. You don't see East Indians calling each other coolies. You don't see Jews calling each other Polacks or anything like that. So the thing is that why should we use a pejorative to describe ourselves? So no way a pejorative could be used as a form of glorification, because if that were the case, why don't we see a social and political movement for economic development and political power in the name of that word? We don't see that going on. If anything, all we see is the perpetuity of a lot of the societal ills, with the N-word being popularized and used mainly. Now, I know that when people use the term, they don't use it in the same way a lot of the time, depending on who you're speaking with. But then again, we still live within the same society with the same philosophical framework, just with a bit of changes because of this new age that we're living in technology. But I think that the word is unacceptable. It's unacceptable.
Most definitely. I would say it's very unacceptable. Going back to the article, I'm not sure if Piers Morgan really wanted to stop racism. I'm not maybe it would have been more effective, in my opinion, to speak to some of his white peers if that was his intention. I'm not really sure about addressing us about it, but either way, the N-word should not be used. But my next question is, are there more pertinent issues other than whether we should or should not be using the N-word?
Right.
Sorry, Naomi. Sorry, guys. Let me just dodge back one step. I think the bigger issue with Piers saying it is not because he's trying to make any difference to it. He's doing exactly what, you know, this entire white supremacy structure does when it comes to racism and racism towards black people. They try to make the idea seem like it's our fault a lot of the time. And I've read the responses between Piers and a few of the people when the article came out, and Piers does not seem like somebody who is trying to educate anyone or trying to help the situation. He's turning the blame. He's calling someone who came up to him and called him out. He's telling them to behave themselves and be better. To me, that's
just in line with that, to interrupt very briefly, we have a tweet from Hannah Okorafor who said Piers needs to focus on his group and changing their mentality.
He needs to, because he's coming with the exact same white supremacy hat. Yes, I'm the white man, I will save you. Exactly the same hat, coming to say, oh, I know what your problem is. You need to stop this so then we don't get influenced to say it because it's your fault. That's just wrong.
Most definitely.
In my opinion.
And back to the question, do you think there are more pertinent issues that we should be addressing other than the N-word? Baruti or Jemima, perhaps you might want to step in here.
You said other issues?
Is this the biggest issue? Why has this issue been highlighted? Is there other things that we could be addressing other than the use of the N-word?
Well, this is the thing right here. Before we talk about any problem, metaphorically, let's say that, let's put it like this. Like I said, the N-word falls under the umbrella of racism, white supremacy. And also, it's not just white supremacy, it's supremacy of other ethnicities, because other ethnicities are benefiting from the inferiority complex that people of African descent have internalized during the past 400 plus years. Whether we speak about Chinese people, whether we speak about East Indian people, whether we speak about so-called Arab people, they all have been benefiting from the subservience and subjugation of people of African descent. So like I said, nigger, the word nigger is not the root of the problem, but it's attached to the niggerization of people of African descent. So the thing is that besides just talking about the word, what we need to do is embrace our history and culture. What we need to do is bring about political dynamics. What we need to bring about is political reform, economic changes, so that once we alleviate a lot of the problems, then we could alleviate the N-word, because it's not just the word, it's the lifestyle which circumvents the word. If I'm making myself clear now.
You're making yourself clear. Could you maybe give us some everyday examples that listeners might also face whereby they're at a disadvantage because the N-words, or there's this superiority complex that everyday listeners might experience because of these issues?
Okay. Now let me go back a little bit. Let me rewind a little bit. Now, when we're speaking about Piers Morgan, when he said what he said, well, we do need to take accountability, because since I've been on the show, I've been speaking from an external perspective as it relates to racism, white supremacy, and other people benefiting from the subservience of us people of African descent. But then again, we need to take on accountability as well. We are living in an age in which we do have more rights than we had during the past 400 years, even though we have an extremely long way to go. We do have the internet, we do have various books, we have various notable scholars and leaders that sacrificed their lives in order to share our history and culture, in order to enlighten our people, in order to inculcate values to our people as it relates to our liberation and justice. But then again, we need to take accountability, meaning that if we don't want for other people to use the word, then we need to stop using the word, because there was entertainers like Richard Pryor, rest in peace to him, and also a lot of entertainers during the time of the blaxploitation movement within the media that popularized the word, that made the word socially acceptable. Because there was a time in which that word wasn't pejorative, to the point in which if you call a black person the N-word, even though black people were possibly using it amongst themselves during the during the 50s, 60s, or 70s, then that person externally could get beat up or could get jumped. But we're living in a society in which that word has been universalized and socially acceptable. So we need to look in the mirror, meaning that if we don't like this person using the word, then why are we using the word? Because a lot of the time, black people will be around Caucasians or Asian people and use the word, making it seem like it's acceptable, making it seem like it's cool to use the word.
Guys,
and to interrupt there and just to interrupt very quickly, we have a couple of tweets. One from Yao Okira, who says, regardless of what Piers Morgan says, black people using the N-word does not empower us or remove its connotations. Hashtag kill N-word. And Rhiannon92 says, people were so mad that Piers wrote that article that they forgot that actually we shouldn't really use the N-word anyway.
Yeah, sorry guys, what I was gonna just interrupt there and say was excuse me, I forgot. Sorry, carry on.
No worries.
It just left my head.
No worries. Okay, so we need to move on because we've got so many things to talk about, and we are over halfway of this podcast. So
sorry guys, can I just go back? I just remembered.
No.
Oh.
We need to stick to the time. Over 200 girls, okay? So over 200 girls were abducted by a terrorist group called Boko Haram in April. We are now in November. The girls are still not back. And as a result of this, Bring Back Our Girls in April began to trend. And it wasn't until this social media movement that mainstream media began to cover this story. So why do you think it took us to trend such a pertinent issue for it to be on the news? And Jemima, maybe you could start us off.
Okay, so I feel like the reason why it took such a long time for it to seem as though it was a big issue, even though it always was just because maybe it didn't seem to affect us as much, obviously because it's not in the Western world. It was going on in Africa, which is a place that some people might not necessarily be connected with. And even going on in Nigeria, people in Nigeria didn't really seem to care as much because it was going on in the north and not necessarily in the central of Nigeria. So if they didn't really care, it would seem that why should we really see it as such a big issue or big news, if you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. No, that's understandable. Okay, Baruti, maybe you could also add your 2 cents, as in why do you think it took such a huge trend on Twitter and Facebook, etc.? Do you not think that if 200 girls, say, went missing in the USA, we would have heard about it?
Yeah, I think that we would have heard. I think that if they were missing in the United States, we would have definitely heard about it because the United States, militarily, economically, politically, and also as it relates to culturally, as it relates to disseminating what's considered to be culturally and socially acceptable, is the most powerful country in the globe. So if we're in the United States or in the UK, we would have heard about it quickly or expeditiously. But I would like to thank the Nigerian bloggers, scholars, and also the sympathizers, if you will, for pushing this issue forward, so that all of us could be aware of the missing school children that have been abducted, unfortunately, in Nigeria. And as you spoke about the Nigerian situation as it relates to southern Nigerians not caring about it, well, the country of Nigeria is under but a geopolitical construct of the past 100 plus years, if you will. I would say the past 120 years going back to the Berlin conferences, or possibly a little before then. Because you had Igbo land, Yoruba land, the houses, they occupied the certain areas. So it was under by the geopolitical construction of various cultural communities who had their own appurtenance, their own lifestyles. And then that was when the British came in and then reaped the benefits of extracting the economic resources, if you will. So when you have a lot of group of people occupying a small geographical or geopolitical area, then you're going to have a whole lot of conflict, scarcity of goods and services, to the point at which people resort to unfortunate circumstances and questionable circumstances for the purpose of power, unfortunately. And that's what we see going on in Nigeria from a general perspective, because there are complexities when it comes to Nigeria. We could speak for like 12 hours straight on this podcast. We're going to talk about Nigeria, and y'all know that.
Yeah.
So the thing is that as it relates to Nigeria, there's not a lot of uniformity and unity, because you have the Igbo saying that those are houses and Fulani's up in the north, so on and so forth and all that. But the thing is that that's the reason why there's a need and necessity for Pan-Africanness and also an Afrocentric mindset, besides looking at each other from a divisive perspective, because what we're doing is looking at each other from the lenses of colonialism, when really we're all interrelated with one another and we're all the same people, even though we have our various cultural communities, or so-called tribes, if you will.
Can I just interrupt you there briefly?
Yes.
I don't actually think it's really that deep when it comes to on the ground in Nigeria. I mean, those things are there. Everything you're saying is correct. However, the way the country is, Nigeria is quite large. But I could take the exact same case that happened in Nigeria and put it in another country, and I would say almost exactly the same would happen, simply because of communication. And these things aren't very common in African countries where a huge group of kids are abducted by a terrorist group. First of all, we don't even know what terrorism is in the first place. Boko Haram is like the first to at least even get the publicity that other African nations get to learn about it. So we don't know that kind of thing. A lot of people will know what to do with it, how to deal with it. So I don't think it's really about the deep post-colonial results of what Nigeria is. I think it was simply communication. It took a very long time for the president to react because they didn't know what was going on. Boko Haram was all new, so it was mainly communication. And once other people, because Cameroon and Nigeria are very close, so people were abducted from Cameroon also. And we lost a huge part of our army trying to protect the border to stop them coming in, because you can just walk across the road and you're in Cameroon from Nigeria. So there isn't much of a border. So they were abducting everybody. They were abducting French expats, not just the girls, but the girls gained that popularity because it was children, and everybody felt some sense of emotional attachment to children, and they could relate. So that's why the Africans in the Western world spoke up and said to everybody back home, like, realize this is real, terrorism is real. Then people picked up and started doing something about it. I don't think it's fair what other nations in the news were saying about the Nigerian government. I don't think it's fair about criticizing how they handled it, because they've never dealt with it before. Everybody's always quick to criticize an African nation. I understand they have their flaws, but at the same time, allow the country to deal with things.
Yeah, but the girls aren't back though. So allow the country to deal with things, but is it okay to just let
definitely.
To just interrupt quickly, and this is not a tweet, this is me personally. I totally hear and understand a lot of what's being said from Baruti, Jemima, and Ruth. However, the last statement that you mentioned, Ruth, I don't really agree in regards to the being critical about the Nigerian government in particular. I do feel, directly or indirectly, that's up for debate. I do strongly feel that the Nigerian government have had a big part to play when it came to this abduction of the girls. And when I say that, I mean in regards to political ambitions, for instance, like with Goodluck Jonathan and promises of ransoms and that not being fulfilled. I do feel that the abduction of, not necessarily the abduction, but the whole scheme in terms of them not being brought back in a country that can, quote unquote, get rid of Ebola in such a timescale. I feel that there is more to it than meets the eye.
That's definitely true, and there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that we don't know about what's going on and what happened to the girls. And exactly, I read an article the other day that said some of them were married off. Like, who has this information and how is it being? Who has this information to know that the girls have been married off? Like, how do you even get that until it's being published in a supposedly reliable news source and people are saying, oh, that's the latest update, and as soon as it stops trending on Twitter, nobody cares anymore.
Exactly, and that's
what it seems
like.
like.
The world forget after Bring Back Our Girls Stop Trending? Has the world forgotten?
they don't care. That's how I see it.
I don't think it's that they don't care or that they've forgotten. It just seems to appear less relevant because it's not in the headlines every day. But if you do type in Google, if you do really care, you can see it. Like, it's just not in the headlines. Doesn't mean they've forgotten. It just doesn't appear to be that relevant because it's not something that bombards us every day. So I just think that's what it is. Just appears less relevant.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. And a second, there's been reports that, the Nigerian government are in negotiation with Boko Haram to try and get these girls back. But Boko Haram have taken over Chibok last week, so that doesn't seem to be working, evidently. Is it ethical at all to negotiate with terrorists? Does this make the Nigerian government look weak to the outside world, the rest of the world? And if we could just touch upon this, I want to make this question very quickly because we need to move on. So maybe, Baruti, if you could just very quickly summarize that question, that answer.
Right. Does it make the Nigerian government look weak?
Yeah.
Negotiated with Boko Haram?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that I don't think that that's the that's the issue right there. I think that the issue is just bring it back the girls by any means necessary, no matter what people think externally, because people are going to think what they're going to think regardless.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
Okay, so what do you think the story really indicates about Nigerian politics as a whole? I don't like to sort of categorize Africa into one, so I'm not going to say African politics, but just Nigerian politics.
Well, it gives the implication that the Nigerian public sector or the government apparatus is dysfunctional, it's unorganized, tenuous, so on and so forth. All the other pejoratives that are synonymous with what I just said, it gives off that implication, unfortunately. But Western media has its ways of propagandizing certain images, certain ideals, certain viewpoints for the purpose of manipulating the masses or the general populace to think a certain way for the purpose of them for the purpose of the media outlets and the people in power to achieve their motives, if you will. But I think that what we need to do is focus on bringing back the girls, the abducted school children. That's definitely the focus right there.
Definitely. And thank you for that. Let us go on now to our next topic, which is the ACS. So many of us, as I said yesterday, join our ACSs. I've been on committee as VP at Loughborough, and Jemima, I know you were on your committee also. I don't know if there's a similar organization in the States, Baruti?
Yes. There are a few. You have the Pan-African Student Unions, you had the Black Student Unions, you had the Black Freedom Society, so there are organizations like that. You have the African Student Associations, you have the Caribbean Student Unions, the Caribbean Student Association, so you have a plethora of organizations with different names, but I would say that they're similar to the ACS. Some of them as it relates to seriousness, as it relates to bringing about political changes, some of them they just have the name, they just have the facade that they're not doing nothing. We're just having entertainment events.
Exactly, and many of us who join those sorts of organizations that you're talking about and are ACSs, that we're from the diaspora. And my first question, therefore, is there a disconnect between us and those in actually living in Africa or in Caribbean countries? Is there a disconnect between us in these organizations and them? What do you think, Jemima?
Okay, I think there does appear to be a disconnect, but I'm unsure as to why there is, because I feel like the ACS is literally to bring people together to know more about the culture, to socialize and be with like-minded people, and people who weren't necessarily born in Britain but are from Africa or the Caribbean can still do that. But I know there is a disconnect, but I'm unsure as to why they feel like they can't still be a part of that. I don't know what it is, but I do think there is a disconnect.
Do you have a reason, Ruth, as to why you think there is a disconnect?
Definitely, it's very hard to stay connected to something you're not immersed in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I hold on to my time in Africa very, very tightly, but I also know when I go back this Christmas, it's going to be crazy for me because it's been 10 years. So I'm still going to feel like an outsider, and I'm going to be stuck in that middle ground because I've stayed here holding on to there, but when I go there, all I know is here. So there's always going to be that rift in between how much can you do over there from where you are. It's always hard.
It is, and it must be even harder. Let me not speak for you, but Baruti, as an African American, right. Do you think there's even more of a contrast between those African Americans and those living in Africa?
Yeah, exactly. Well, certainly so, because as aforementioned, a lot of us are under mercy, and also just like what the sister said before me, a lot of us aren't immersed within our history and culture. Number one, and number two, with not being immersed in the history and culture, you don't have a cognizance. You're oblivious to the cultural customs, to the historicity, to the lifestyles as it relates to the continent of Africa. And also, African people may have a misunderstanding of African people that live in the Americas. When I say the Americas, I'm talking about the United States and also within the Caribbean. So, of course, there's a disconnect to the point at which African Americans are indoctrinated to believe that Africans are not civilized, to the point at which continental Africans believe that Afro-Caribbeans and African Americans are not civilized. So then when they meet with one another, there's the anonymity, there's the conflict, and all it is just divide and conquer, because it would alleviate Pan-Africanism, which will bring about economic and political power, and also people of African descent on different parts of the world coming together for the purpose of controlling the resources of one of the most wealthiest pieces of real estate on the globe, which is the continent of Africa, which is 12 million square miles.
And what do you think the benefit of controlling that real estate is?
Wealth, power.
How does that trickle down to us ordinary people?
A whole lot, and it depends on us. It depends on us. It could certainly trickle down. It's just a matter of us coming together and also taking advantage of the different areas of human activity depending on our respective dexterities or our gifts. And I'm speaking about economics, education, entertainment, law, labor, politics, war, religion, and aesthetics. Taking advantage of the different areas of human activity, finding our respective lanes, our respective goals, our respective dexterities, inclinations, so on and so forth, and utilizing that for the purpose of Black empowerment, not just within our respective countries, but also globally, and us being interconnected with one another so that we could bring about positive changes, so that we could start these manufacturing businesses, these distribution businesses, these service and retail oriented businesses for the purpose of not just accumulating wealth from an individual perspective, but from a collective perspective, whether it helps someone or motivates someone directly or indirectly. So I think that that's one of the ways in which we could bridge these gaps that have been constructed due to slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, racism, colonialism, imperialism, so on and so forth.
And what are the solutions? How can we connect with those in Africa or Caribbean countries? How can we achieve what you're talking about?
Oh yeah, we could do that in a whole lot of ways. And honestly, that would take hours upon hours. But some of the great people that laid the framework for that, people like Kwame Nkrumah, rest in peace to him. People like Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Bob Marley via entertainment elucidated Pan-Africanist ideals with his music. Fela Kuti within his music. And also his son as well within his music. So with us doing that is bridging the gap. We could do it through the internet, networking with one another. We could do that by starting social and political programs. Organization is extremely important. Before we can have mass mobilization, we need to have mass organization, meaning organizations being interconnected and working interdependently with one another for the purpose of independence from oppression, independence from miseducation, independence from relying on the public sectors, which have been colonizing us for 400 plus years. Independence from anything that is a hindrance towards us achieving greatness as a people. So the thing is that we can definitely do it. It's just a matter of us learning our respective crafts, learning our trades, whether it's engineering, whether it's political science, whether it's sociology, whether it's religious studies, whether it's marketing, and then linking up with like-minded people so that we can bring about these changes. And it won't happen overnight because the pyramids weren't built overnight. It's going to take generations upon generations. But the only thing that matters is that when we pass away during our scarce and ephemeral time on this earth, we'll know that things are in motion. So that's what matters right there.
Couldn't agree more.
What a fantastic explanation. Sorry, Peter. You going to say something?
I just said I couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you. Respect.
Exactly. What are people saying on Twitter about this subject?
What are people saying? People aren't saying a lot, if I'm being honest. I think Baruti is scared. I think Baruti has scared quite a few people tonight.
Nah.
In a positive way. In a positive way. He's spitting flames.
And
I mean,
Baruti, I appreciate this is quite a deep subject, but maybe you can just summarize some of the things that Dr. Nkrumah speaks about or spoke about.
Right.
Teachers.
Well, exactly. Well, as it relates to Dr. Nkrumah and what he spoke about, what we need to understand about Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, of course, he was born in the Gold Coast, which is modern-day Ghana, and we had to understand that he traveled in America to receive his education. But a lot of us, we focus on the Western education when he went to when he studied in Pennsylvania, so on and so forth. But what we need to understand is that during his time in America, you had the new Negro movement, or should I say the time of the Harlem Renaissance, if you will, to the point at which you had a lot of Pan-Africanists, you had a lot of black nationalists speaking in Harlem, speaking in the streets of Harlem and also different parts of America. And Nkrumah would listen to these lecturers, listen to these scholars, listen to these political activists and these nationalists, and he internalized a lot of their ideals. And also he was entrenched in the studies of Marcus Garvey as well. Now, as it relates to that philosophy that Nkrumah spoke about, he spoke about the United States of Africa, unifying Africa for the purpose of economic development and political power, and also feeding the people and redistributing the resources for the people. But of course, with the United States of Africa, he internalized the ideals of Marxism, Leninism, socialism, if you will. But the thing is that I'm not speaking about it from that perspective. I'm speaking about us unifying together for the purpose of economic development and empowerment. But of course, utilizing the ideals of the free market, if you will, the so-called free market, if you will, because the free market, African free market or African businesses predate capitalism. We are practicing so-called concepts of so-called capitalism before capitalism even existed. We had acephalous societies in Africa in which people would come to the marketplace, people would sell their respective goods and services, specifically within West Africa, or we could bring it to ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. So the thing is that what we need to do is take advantage of the so-called free market system so that we could create these businesses, so that we could patronize these businesses, so that we could have the power, so that we could have the purchasing power and utilize the purchasing power so that we could support our businesses, so that we could bring about a change and create our own economies. Because by creating our own economies, we will stimulate the economies of these Western countries. Like if black people, if we were to retain the $1.1 trillion that we gross in America, then we could stimulate not only our economy, the American economy, if you will. And also the same applies to the African population and the Afro-Caribbean population in the UK. So that's what Kwame Nkrumah was speaking about, the United States of Africa from a political perspective. But before we speak about things from a political perspective, we need to have that economic power, because by having economic power, then we'll be politically influential.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you.
Just to interrupt, I think someone overcame their fear of, no, I'm joking. The real underscore Ifa tweeted, the elephant in the room is the fine line between empowering the black nation and black supremacy. What are our thoughts on that?
I mean, looking at American history, black history in America, I would have said, you know, there was a time when the Pan-Africanist movement was very strong. Black Americans were wrapping their hair and wearing big earrings and getting in touch with nature. There's a very, very thin line, because it could get to an extreme. It's not always, you know, fair enough, there were restrictions and they had roadblocks in the way, because a lot of people in America, the majority of people in America, didn't like it, didn't like the movement, didn't like the power that was coming through from it, and it gains this negative connotation to the point where no one's even attempting to do that stuff now. It just seems like if you ball your fist up, black power seems to represent racism for some reason, which I don't understand. When someone told me that, oh, that's racist, I was like, no, it's not. What do you mean? So there's
just
a lot
to
of negative
interrupt once
connotations.
more, sorry, we've got a tweet from Success_Talks. Success Talks says, do you think a reason for the disconnect is because when we learn skills over here, and I'm assuming here means
Abroad.
The West, pretty much, we assume that we know better than those in Africa. This then leads to a sense of animosity from our African brothers and sisters who may not feel that these processes will.
and jealousy also, because
on both sides.
because they will think, oh well, just because you went over there, I want to go over there and do better than you. And it's okay, because sometimes it makes you work hard, but also it's not right, because it completely puts your mind in the wrong way. I mean, Peter, we spoke about this a while ago, how most African parents seem to have 4 professions that they want all their children to do. How do they expect every single child to become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or an accountant? There's no way you can have a world made up of those 4 professions. Nobody's going to clean, nobody's going to make anything, because clearly none of you are skilled in that field. So Africans are restricted in that sense. So looking in the diaspora, they think, oh, okay, that's the only place where they'll come out of that shell. That's the only place where they're allowed to, they'll be able to put their pride aside and do a menial job, just so they can go back home and boast, or see them as though they've done it.
Right.
But on the continent, they feel like they're too good to work. They just want to go abroad and get money quickly and come back and double it and be rich. So, it creates a lot of jealousy.
That's a stereotype. Is it not more about there's a misconception that we are inherently better off being living in the West as opposed to...
It is a misconception, but it's something that's been fed to people on the continent for so long that they won't even believe it until you tell them. Or even if you tell them, they won't believe it until they see it. It's something that's been going on for generations, and they've idolized. If you idolize something, you don't always believe the truth when you hear it.
And just to interrupt quickly before we move on to the next subject, we've got a tweet in from Shantae Joseph LDN. She says she needs some of what Baruti Libra is drinking.
That Libre juice, hit me up. I've got a few bottles left.
Okay, so let us talk about Ferguson. And I've said, and I think other people have also said, so Mike Brown was shot earlier this year by a police officer, shot dead, and it's suggested that he wasn't, I don't want to be sued, so I'm saying suggested that he was stood saying don't shoot with his hands up, and the police officer shot him, allegedly. And this has caused the new civil rights movement to emerge, I feel, in Ferguson. And so protests have developed as a consequence of this. What do you think are the benefits of protest? Is this old school protest of get on the streets and march, is that outdated? Do we need other forms?
Yes, it's outdated. Yes.
Why?
Would I expand on that?
Yes. Like I said, it's outdated. The reason why it's outdated is because it's not going to. Because the thing is that what we need to do is accumulate political power, and the only way that we could accumulate political power is through embracing history and culture and us controlling the economics within the community. Just holding up the picket signs and burning down storefronts and so on and so forth is not going to bring about the political change. What's going to bring about the political change is first the mindset. Before there could be any political revolution, there has to be a psychological, intellectual, and cultural revolution. A revolution starts from within. And also, as it relates to the civil rights movement, it brought about integration and also occupational and institutional assimilation for some people, to the point at which you have the so-called token Negroes, quote unquote, benefited and descended up the social stratification system. But then again, you don't have a lot of the other people, should I say the masses, ascending up the social stratification systems, if you will, or benefited from the amenities of the civil rights movement. Now, that's where accountability comes into play, and accountability comes into play as it relates to internal development. If we were more organized as a people, if something like Ferguson were to happen, then there will be other ways to combat a lot of the issues within the community. And also, if we were organized, then a situation like Ferguson probably would have not happened, because we would have had a paramilitary force within the community in order to protect the citizens within that community against a lot of the unjust police officers who are supposed to protect and preserve and serve. Excuse me, pardon me. And but what they do is protect and preserve order and consistent stability as it relates to the power structure.
You were saying about unjust police officers. So every 28 hours, and 28 hours, a black person is killed by the police or vigilantes in the US. And obviously the numbers aren't as shocking in the UK, but obviously we have stop and search, which is biased towards the black community. So maybe we can just talk about what are some of the solutions that we could develop in order to hold to stop these things from happening, really.
Well, the thing is that as it relates to some of the solutions to stop police brutality from occurring, we need to be organized. We need to be organized as a community to the point of which.
Do that? How do we get organized?
How we get organized as a community?
Mm-hmm.
There are various ways to get organized within a community, and like I said, we need to start an organization. We need to start organizations, and not only that, with any organization, of course, it needs to revolve around our history and culture. Number one, but number two, what we need to do within this organization is that we need to provide incentives, because with anything, if we're going to persuade people, or within social relations, whether it's interpersonal or intrapersonal, it's about providing incentives. We need to incentivize Africanity, Afrocentricity, so meaning that we may need to provide jobs within the community. We need to build institutions within the community. We need to provide resources. We need to have scholarships for the younger people to attend school if they can't afford to go to school. We need to have study abroad programs so that we could bring students overseas so that they could see another world besides the community that they live in, which is immersed with poverty, which is entrenched with violence and entrenched with all the other negative atrocities which come along with living in the inner city. So we need to have that. And also, as it relates to building the communities, as it relates to building institutions, of course, with building institutions, of course, they cost money. We need more venture capitalists within the community. When I say venture capitalists, I'm talking about people that look like us, people with the Afrocentric and black empowerment mindset to fund businesses within the community. So then with funded businesses within the community, that we could pull resources within the community and have a separate economy. Now, what's the purpose of the police? The purpose of the police is to protect and also serve the people that own property within the community. But since we're not owning property within the community, then they're not looking out for our best interests. They're looking out for the best interests of the people that own the resources, for the most part, the wealthy, or the people that pay the taxes, if you will, pay the property taxes because they own the property within the community. So what we need to do is that we need to own the institutions within the community. And once we own the institutions and once we have economic power, then of course we'll have the political power, because we'll be the ones which will patronize and also elect the political candidates. And I'm not just talking about voting, I'm talking about funded campaigns. So once we're the ones that are more influential as it relates to getting a politician in office, then of course we will have influence over the police, because the police, they work for the politicians, if you will. And the politicians, they work for the people that are economically powerful. So what we need to do is gain economic power, and we need the culture and the heritage to be the social glue.
So do you think it's up to us to change, therefore, some of the minds or the psychology of some of these white people who are committing these killings or these stop and searches? Is it up to us to change the minds of our some of our oppressors?
So and to add on to that question, we've just got a tweet in from Dennis Sem. Hey, Dennis. Dennis says, how do you suggest we organize ourselves when these incidents occur? How do other groups do it more effectively?
Yeah, that's a good question right there. This is what we need to do right here. This is what we need to do. Other groups, when you go to the United States, specifically in New York City, you have Little Italy. You have Crown Heights, which is where a lot of the Jews are, and they own the businesses within the community. In Little Italy, they own the businesses within the community. In my city, Jersey City, you have a place called Little India. The Indians own the businesses within the community. And also their own people, they patronize the businesses within that cultural and ethnic community that they live in. So that's what we need to do. Once we own the institutions within the community, once we control the politics within the community, once we control the resources within the community, then we'll be more so respected within the community, to the point at which if something were to happen within the community, like police brutality or so on and so forth, then we'll have more power, we'll have representation in order to bring about changes. And additionally speaking, what we need to do is politicize a lot of we need to politicize a lot of the younger people within the community that are supposedly rigorous, rough and tough. And I'm talking about a lot of the gang members within the community. A lot of them, they don't have the education, they don't have the cultural continuity or the history, so on and so forth. So if they're supposedly rough and tough, then what they need to do is become politicized so that they could protect the community as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're just about to end, and let's wrap up. So I want you all to give us some action points that we can do today. So nothing huge, some steps that we can take today in order to bring about some of these solutions that we've talked about today. Okay, right. So like economic stability or economic power, social power, political power, etc. So Ruth, if you could just give us some short bullet point action points, please.
For us to move forward, in my opinion, I feel we need to ask more questions. We need to, ask the right questions. We need to look in the right places. Go back, look up African history and Google what you need to know. You read so much, you get so much information that you'll find out. You'll be able to learn something. Speak to family, speak to friends, speak to people, network and socialize more with each other. I think that's the way for us to move forward.
Okay, great, thank you. Jemima, please.
Okay. I think education, also being aware of the way that we are perceived by others and not giving them a reason to continue to perceive us in such a negative light. Also having a genuine care about what's going on and just finding resources, talking to people and educating yourself.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jemima. And Baruti?
Yeah. I think that what we need to do is continue to read about our history and culture, organizers form study groups, and by organizing and funded study groups, teach the study groups and also enhance the awareness of the study groups about Black-owned businesses within the community, so then we can pull our resources and support these Black-owned businesses within the communities, whether we talk about restaurants, whether we talk about clothing stores, whether we talk about clothing lines or grocery stores or supermarkets. And if we don't have that within the community, we need to have these study groups so that they can form into other organizations so that we could pull these resources so that we could start our own businesses within the communities. And additionally, we need to have contests so that we could use the resources that we pull in order to pay for a student to go into school or to study abroad.
Thank you. And I think we've learned so much today, and unfortunately we're going to have to end, but what you guys have really said is to educate yourselves through Google, Google stuff, read books. There are many books out there. Network, find people with similar interests to you, and just really care and take a care in towards your culture, towards your people. I want to say a big thank you to Peter for making this happen, for inviting us to come and facilitate this discussion. Thank you to everybody who's listening and for contributing on Twitter. We really, really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
So can I just say, do you want to add anything in here?
Just very briefly, I just wanted to say thank you again. Thank you, Jemima. Thank you, Baruti. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Solomon, yesterday. Sienna, Tina. You guys are absolutely awesome. And again, and Naomi, thank you especially, because without you, this wouldn't happen. This wouldn't have occurred on both days. And the reason why this is so important, because education is important, and once you are educated, you are well informed, and you can make well informed decisions which then change your perception of not only yourself but others' perception of yourself. You can achieve more. Exactly. So I just hope that people who are listening in, whether they tweeted or not, just gain something from this, and we can just move on and move forward as a collective, and people listen to this over and just support each other, support the things that Baruti is getting involved with, the things that Tina is getting involved with. Yeah. So I just want to say thank you to everyone again. Thank you for listening.
No, thank you, Peter.
Thank you all, definitely.
And again, thank you to the listeners. Please do subscribe to this YouTube channel. There are also other podcasts on iTunes that you just type into podcast. Again, thank you, and I think we can round it up here. We're going to carry on this conversation on Twitter, and what I'll do is put all your ads in the link below. So if you want to carry on, use the hashtag VC Podcast. Okay, so this has been VC Podcast Part 2. Thank you again, and we will see you soon.
Peace and blessings.
Bye.
Bye.
Peace.